For as long as I've been a LEGO fan, dragons have been a huge part of my favorite LEGO sets. I want to take a page out of LEGO's book and design a custom dragon of my own. So today, let's build a hungry dragon, and maybe even some unlucky dinner for it. Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark. Looks like this minifigure has given me a hand before, or two. Today, I just need her bandana. We can use it as a wrinkled dragon eyelid. For the eye, let's use a hollow stud and a 2-long bar in red. Next, I need the shoulder armor from another minifigure. Let's lock it in place with another hollow stud. That leaves us with one eye for a very hungry dragon. I've built up another, so we can start to imagine what it'll look like attached together. I've also picked out this classic dragon wing, which I want to incorporate into the design. Let's attach two together with a rod end, bar, and a round plate. Then, I'll add some Technic connectors and another plate to get a sufficiently wrinkled dragon nose. Next, we just need a way to attach the eyes. Let's build up the skull, starting with a few connectors, which we can add a stopper axle, cam, and socket to. In order to get this weird angle I need for the eyes, let's use the goat of LEGO parts, the burnt hot dog. Some robot arms can clip into that to form the sockets for our eye sockets. After, let's flip this connector the right way around and connect the snout. In my last video, I dismantled my friend's Hungarian horntail and ended up with this tail part, which I think would fit perfectly here as some spikes on the head. I'll connect some clips so we can attach it in. With those spikes in place, I think that some more might even be in order. Let's build up the structure to hold these spikes using a bunch of clips and bars. This lets us position the spikes with many degrees of freedom. So even though this looks like a complete mess of bars, we'll be able to hide it behind the dragon wing parts. I'll add some robot arms into the back of the head and clip in the spikes. For the lower jaw, let's grab this socket to use as the base. I'll friction weld this rod in, leaving what I assume is a permanent dent in my hand. After, we can attach in some robot arms. And finally, a T-bar and a hollow stud can be used to attach this spider shell. Now, with this lower jaw done, let's attach the two head halves together to complete our dragon head. With this done, let's build some dragon wings. I'm gonna start off with these awesome cloth parts. If I combine two here, I think we'll get a pretty unique wing shape. Now we need to build up the structure. For the shoulder, I'll build up a custom joint using a number of individual ball and socket joints. For each axis of rotation, I've doubled up the socket joints so that the rotation is constrained. I'll build up the wing with a few funky parts, including this Galador arm. To that, I'll add a dino tail. Then, we can build up the other end by attaching a Technic brick for the axle and some ball joints to connect in the shoulder. We can cap off the shoulder by attaching this newer shoulder shell. To make this next connection strong, I'm going to need to do something a little weird and use a half pin and a rod to attach this connector and then lock it all together with a pin axle. This makes for a stronger connection than if I had just used the pin. Let's continue with a few more Technic bits where we'll hide some red pins. With this complete, we can move on to the wing fingers. We can build up the first one with a connector and then use some ratcheting joints for the knuckles, making sure to use black axles here since they peek out through the design. For the creepy claw, I'll use a robot arm, rod end, and a spike. When I'm building, I usually like to toss on a show. My current favorite is Cowboy Bebop. But if you live in Canada or the US, you can't access it on your local Netflix. That's where Surfshark, the sponsor of today's video, comes in. Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in more than 100 countries, including Japan, where I can watch Cowboy Bebop. With Surfshark, you can change your location to unblock content libraries and even streaming services from other countries. But that's not all. Surfshark keeps your online identity safe by encrypting all the information sent between your device and the internet, meaning that your personal data is protected from the prying eyes of big companies and cybercriminals. Surfshark does this by masking your IP address so that your city, country, and download history aren't linked to your identity. Sign up to Surfshark today using the link in the description and use code mitch.builds to get an extra 4 months for free. Trying it out is risk-free because Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee. That's code mitch.builds to get an extra 4 months for free. Now with the 3 fingers done, we can attach them into the arm. I'll use this boat stud part to connect them all together. We'll add one to the other side as well, to make for a surprisingly strong assembly. Now it's finally time to connect the wing membrane. I want the backside to be the gold one, so it's not as in our face when it's assembled into the final design. With the last of the membrane attached, we can flip the wings over to reveal what we've been working so hard on, the completed wing. Next, let's figure out what the neck will look like. I have here one of the original socket joints from Bionicle. These joints can be attached together with an axle to make for a strong and flexible neck connection, with way more connection points when compared to Hero Factory bones. Let's connect a bunch together with some axles. You can see just how flexible and strong this socket snake can be. For the connection to the torso, I'll add in some more sockets, this time using Hero Factory ones, since they seem to have a little more friction. Then for the dragon scales, I have a flex tube, which we can string some Hero Factory shells onto. You can see I also added some little connectors, which will fit into our existing neck construction. First, let's add some spikes to the spine. Here, I want to use both tan and white spikes for a little more realism and variation. Let's clip them into the spine. Now it's time to connect our spine into our socket snake. For a pop of color, I think a red stripe running down our dragon would be really cool. This flex tube is a good start. I'll add a cone and a connector, and then we can attach that in. On the other end of the neck, I'll add in a connector and a half pin for the stripe to connect to. To add some more structure to the tube, I'll clip in a droid arm to hold it in place. Using a flex tube keeps the neck build flexible, so to continue that, we can use some corrugated tubes for more detail. Let's connect our tubes together with pins and a few connectors. Now let's add them in. For the scaly underbelly here, we can use some hexagons. At the base of the neck, I'll connect a shell and add this gunmetal armor part. To add in a few more of these hexagon scales, I'll connect a droid arm and then add some T-bars to the neck for them to clip into. For some more range of motion, I'll use this Hero Factory bone for our connection. I'll add a rounded plate and one more hexagon to complete the neck design. One thing I've been thinking is that it'd be really fun for the dragon to be depicted hunting its prey. So if we want to do that, we need to build up a mountain goat. For the goat's eye, I want to use this joystick base to recreate the eye shape. We can build up the head with a snot brick, a short brick, and a cheese slope. After, I'll add in a rod and a minifigure neck bracket for an additional connection point. Now we need to make the head a bit more furry. This Santa has the perfect beard for the job. Hopefully I don't get put on the naughty list for this. To lock the fur in place, I'll use a snot part and then add a rubber doodah for the nose detail. For the neck, I'll attach a clip and a droid torso. Turning to the ears, I have these dino jaws that I think would work perfectly. It took me a really long time to find a good way to attach them, but I finally settled on using this rod end, which has the added benefit of giving me a location to attach the horns. We can attach one of these assemblies on each side. And I figured it was appropriate to have its tongue sticking out. That caps off the goat head, but now we need to build up some legs. For the hoofs, I want to use this minifigure visor part. We just need to span the gap there. We can do that with a pair of robot arms side by side. Let's continue the legs with a candlestick and a cone. Then, for the shoulder, I'll use a stopper axle. Then, a hollow stud can hold this small ball joint. On the other side, I'll add some Technic parts to connect the two halves together. For the hind legs, I'll build up another hoof. I decided not to give the legs any knee joints, because the final pose I want for our goat has his legs splayed out in surprise. For the hip joint here, I'll connect a socket and then round out the leg with this white visor part. Then, we need to figure out a connection point for this Star Wars shoulder armor. Naturally, a mess of clips and bars comes to the rescue once again. Now, with the legs done, we can build up the goat's torso. Starting with this fur part. I find that when I build smaller creatures like this guy, they tend to be a little less structurally sound than my larger builds. I think that's mostly just because I can get away with it, since it doesn't need to support a lot of weight or anything. Let's add some small sockets to the shoulders, and then build up the neck with a white robot arm and hand. To create some furry details, let's use these classic bullrock shields. Then, for the bottom of the torso, I'll use this orca jaw, which I'll connect with hopes and dreams. For the back, let's use this bike fairing, but we'll need to get another connection point somehow. For that, let's add a minifigure neck bracket. And then, an inkwell and a connector can clip the back in. I'll add a ball joint here, and then for the waist, we can use this double socket, which can house some ball joints for the hips. The tail can be made out of this googly eye and a bullrock eye. Let's connect this in. Oops, this goes back on here. Now I can click in the 4 legs. And finally, add the head. And it's time to get back to our dragon. My idea is to have a static leg connecting here, with the mountain goat being grabbed from this rock outcropping. I've used some clear lift arms for the air, and then we can integrate the bent lift arms into the leg. I want the full dragon to be supported by just this one leg, so I've made a large base. Now let's build the static leg, which will have to be very sturdy to hold the weight of the whole dragon. For that, I'm gonna put on my engineer's hat and just over-design it and hope that does the trick. Let's connect 3 of these fancy beams together. Now, let's add some more pins for later connections. Let's armor up this would-be leg by attaching this ball joint to a connector. With that, we can clip a large shell in place. For the upper leg, I don't know what angle I want to attach in our dragon at yet, so let's make this joint flexible but strong by using an ungodly amount of ball and socket joints. I think 4 joints for each axis of rotation should do the trick. Let's use another 4 for the second axis. Next, we need to add 4 ball joints. The other half of this assembly can click into those. Hopefully that does the trick. For the structure of the upper leg, I'm once again turning to these Technic beams for their rigidity. I'll add in a number of connectors and pins here, so that the assembly can connect into the hip joint. I'll further lock it together with a spacer lift arm and an axle. For the bulk of the scaly exterior here, I have this Visorak body which we can use. Let's add some pins to it. And then a pulley wheel can give me the final connection I need to assemble it into the upper leg. Next, let's add a ball joint so a large shell can fill in our gap. For some detail, I'll build up this steering wheel to add where the Vizorek spinner would usually go. Now we can attach the two leg sections together with this fixed bend in the knee. The ankle side can attach into our stand for a super sturdy support for the whole dragon. The other leg, contrastingly, only has to support its own weight, so we don't have to get too fancy with the design. So for the lower leg, I'll add some ball joints to this axle and then clip in a pair of shells. Next, we can build up the ankle with a socket, some ball joints, and this axle to bar connector. I'll connect some shells here and then clip this into the lower leg. For the foot, I'll start off with this large Chima foot and add some robot hands. Then, we can install some ratchet joints. Now, another round of robot hands. And finally, some rod ends which can be capped off with claws. Let's bend the fingers into place and construct a similar thumb. Then, we can connect in the foot. For the upper leg, I have a similar design, but I've added a ball joint instead of the fixed knee we used previously. We can use that to connect the leg together. Now that the leg's complete, we can turn our attention to the body. Let's start with the neck connection. I'll build it up with 3 ball joints, and then some Technic cams. Then, let's construct the rest of the skeleton with a bunch of Technic. Really what I'm trying to go for here is a strong structure for us to armor up to create the dragon. We can strengthen this part with an alternating beam and a pin before adding a bunch of connection points for us to use later on. I'm not too worried about filling out the overall shape just yet. The next section can start off with a beam, which I'll add some pins to. After, I'll attach a connector and an axle before we connect this in to the structure we built earlier. For the other end, let's cancel out the angle we created with another bent lift arm. I'll fasten in some half lift arms and connectors with various pins. Then, let's do the tail connection point in the same way we did the neck, with a trio of ball joints. Now we can attach this sub-assembly in and lock it together with another beam. And with this skeleton sorted, we can focus on building up the details we want. I'll continue the neck stripe with this red dino tail, which can glitch into this funky Galador limb. For the connection, I'll add a few more Technic bits. I really like the details on this weird part. Let's see how this looks with the neck we built earlier. Nice, I like that. Now we can connect it into the skeleton. Let's do something similar for the tail stripe, with some more dino tails and Galador parts. For the hips, I need 4 stacked ball joints. Let's add them to this large axle. There's an axle hole from that angled lift arm, which we can connect them into, and then add 4 ball joints for the other side. Now, to fill in the gap, let's use these Star Wars shin parts. I'll continue by using these massive Hero Factory shells. To lock the free ends together, I'll double up some ball joints and clip it in place. For the back, I have a bunch of these Midgard serpent heads from a LEGO Vikings set. Let's add some connection points to them. This second one I'll use to attach the wings, so we can go ahead and add some ball joints for the shoulders. Let's connect both of these panels in. And then, with a final serpent head, we can build it up a bit with a socket, some ball joints, and a shell. Then let's connect it in. I'll continue the torso here with some large Technic panels. I'm using all these really large panel and shell type parts so that the torso of our dragon is lighter than if I had built this out of a number of smaller parts. With this panel subassembly done, we can attach it into the existing torso. We need the dragon to be as light as it can be so that the single leg can support it. One more shell can be used here to fill in a gap in the front of the torso. And just like that, the torso is complete, and it's time for the tail. The technique for the tail is a continuation of what I did for the neck, so that we get some nice visual consistency. It's funny, I never went out of my way and bought these old socket parts, but I have a ton of them from the early days of Bionicle. My tinfoil hat theory is that what killed the original run of Bionicle was the mold change away from these old sockets and towards the much brittler second generation of sockets. Anyways, this tail is going to be absolutely massive. Let's build up the connection point for the tail. We'll need an equally massive string of shells for this flex tube to go along with. In contrast to the sockets, I've been collecting up this many dark green Hero Factory shells for years, just buying 2 or 3 whenever I make a part order from a store that has some. Halfway through there, I had to splice in a second flex tube. Let's connect our dragon tail segments together. I'm surprised that even with such a large tail, the socket chain does a great job of holding its shape. Next, let's add the all-important spikes. For the sides, let's again build up a tube of tubes. For a little bit of tapering to the end of the tail, I'll use this smaller hose, which resembles the corrugated tube. Let's go ahead and attach it in. Now for the underbelly scales, let's connect those hexagons in. For the red stripe, I'm going to need more than 1 flex tube, so I'll attach 2 of them together, and then build up a little assembly to use clipping in the stripe, along with some droid arms. For the tip of the tail, I'm using this dragon head part, which I'll simply add a red dino tail to, and an axle to fit in place. I've went ahead and built up another of these Technic panel contraptions, which I'll attach into the tail. A fun feature of these older Technic panels is that they can house corrugated tubes. With those connected in, the tail's done, and we can move on to the final assembly. I'll start by attaching the head to the neck. Then the neck to the torso, remembering to connect the tube. After, I'll clip in the free leg and the wings. Now that tail can lock in place. And finally, the stand leg can finish off this dragon. And it's time for the beauty shots. Thanks to all the amazing people supporting me over on Patreon. You are the building blocks that make this channel possible. And special shout out to my newest patrons, Jafa, Dakota Gabbery, Braden Jenkins, Salim, Alex Tang, and Prometheus. Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to use code mitch.builds to get an extra 4 months for free when you sign up with the link in my description. If you like this video, YouTube thinks you'll enjoy this one too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. But until then, happy building.